Dien Bien Phu, the end of French imperialism. France became involved in Vietnam as early as the 1850s under the pretext of defending oppressed Christian missionaries. Resources and prestige were the true goals of France in Indochina. Thus, a fierce struggle almost a century long began for the fate of Vietnam. The French progressively conquered Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos throughout the mid to late 1800s. The independent spirit of the Vietnamese people made sure insurrections were as brutal as they were common in this era. When France returned to her Indo-Chinese colonies after World War II, they found Vietnam armed after fighting the Japanese, hostile to imperial powers, and determined to form a free Vietnamese state. The First Indochina War lasted from 1945 to 1954, culminating with the monolithic Battle of Dien Bien Phu in March through May of 1954. These are the high mountains that surround the battlefield on the east and west sides, peaceful now, but witness to savagery in the past. French High Command decided to build a fortress in the mountains of northeast Vietnam to prevent supplies from reaching Viet Minh guerrillas in Laos by way of China. The French created a series of forts on a valley floor next to the river Nam Yum. These forts were given women's names common back home. The encampment was supplied by 2 runways and therefore relied solely on air support. From a defensive standpoint, Dien Bien Phu was a sound idea, as the French had provoked the Viet Minh to attack strongholds in the past, which led to French victories. The fatal error, however, lay in underestimating an enemy that chiseled the mountains on either side of the encampment into roads, an impressive feat, and used 360 degrees of artillery fire to hammer the forts while driving away air support. When battle broke out on March 13, 1954, the French numbered around 12,000 well-disciplined men, while the Viet Minh had around 55,000 to 65,000 eager soldiers. What the French lacked in numbers, their tanks more than made up for in power. The tanks were produced and loaned to the French by the United States, who saw a French victory as an opportunity to prevent the spread of communist ideology. For the French at Dien Bien Phu, the tanks were a godsend, for the Viet Minh a menace. A large portion of France's colonial war against communist nationals was bankrolled by the United States. The siege was 55 days of hell. It began with an almost continuous barrage of mortar and cannon fire raining out of the mountains thought to be impassable. The Viet Minh used a noose-like strategy to surround, ensnare, and destroy French landing strips and dig in against counterattacks. Early in the siege, France lost her airfields and had to hope for supply parachutes. Several French fortifications fell within the first few weeks to infantry rush or human wave tactics. The French reorganized and bogged down the attacks as the battle drew on. Near the end, the scene was reminiscent of World War I, both sides employing trenches. Slowly, the Viet Minh gained ground, and on the 7th day of May, 1954, an all-out assault on the last defenders won the day. France lost approximately 3,000 men, with approximately 10,000 more captured. Due to horrid prison camp conditions, of that 10,000, a little over 3,000 would live to see France again. The Viet Minh lost around 8,000, with 12,000 wounded. Dien Bien Phu was the final act in the Indo Chinese War and resulted in the free states of Communist North Vietnam and capitalist South Vietnam. This was the beginning of the end for France's empire. Perhaps most importantly to Americans, the United States filled the vacuum in Vietnam following the Truman Doctrine. Ultimately, this caused a final war to unify Vietnam and proved to be one of the United States' most challenging moments.